Today, our guest speaker is Eva, who's going to be talking about the work of John Gottman. Her talk is entitled "Turning Toward One Another." Let's put our hands together and welcome Eva.
Hi, so I asked Emma to play that song specifically because I think it embodies the core principle of John Gottman's work that I'm going to be talking about today. I mean, you could say there are several core principles, but turning toward one another is one of the top three or handful. Um, so let's start off with who John Gottman is and why his work is relevant to our lives and to what we're doing here in this church. John Gottman is a psychologist. He's a lab psychologist. He runs a lab here in Seattle that's nicknamed the Love Lab. And he's been doing research on relationships and especially marriages for over 40 years at this point. So he started off trying to figure out what made people divorce. Why did some marriages not last? And after a lot of studying, looking at couples in the lab talking to each other, all wired up with like stress hormone detectors and heartbeat detectors and cameras so people could count their blinks and how often they looked at each other. They were measuring all this stuff. After he'd been doing that for a while, he got so he could figure out what made people split up. And it was about how they communicated with each other. And so at this point, after all the time that he's been working on it, of course, with a lot of other people as well, at this point, he can predict from watching a few minutes of conversation between a pair of newlyweds whether they're going to be married in 5 years. He can tell with 90+% accuracy whether they're going to stay married, which is pretty amazing. But he wanted to go beyond that, not just predict, but figure out how to help people whose marriages are not going well recover their love for one another that made them get married in the first place, figure out how to get back in touch with each other and nurture that relationship. This research was founded on marriage, and I think at first he was working just with heterosexual couples. He did branch out and work with same-sex couples. He's worked with couples that are not married. It kind of started with het couples, but it branches out not even just to romantic relationships, but even to parent-child relationships, co-worker relationships, friendships. And he's written a whole bunch of books. A bunch of them are focused on romance relationships. But he's also got one called Raising Emotionally Intelligent Children. And a couple of the good ones that I would particularly recommend are What Makes Marriages Succeed or Fail, which has been through several editions now, so it's been updated. 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work, and 8 Dates, which is kind of a workbook for couples. So that's who he is and why he's impressive, why we should listen to this guy. He's not just making stuff up. Sometimes people writing relationship advice are just making stuff up from their own intuitions or observations without it being founded in many thousands of hours of analysis and comparison. So let's start with why relationships go downhill, because that's what he observed first. He ended up coming up with what he calls the 4 horsemen, not the atheist horsemen you might be familiar with, the public atheist figures, but some principles that end up harming relationships. When these are present, generally the relationship is not going to last. Criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. These don't always show up at the same time, and they don't always show up in a particular order, but usually stonewalling is a later step. So let's start by defining each of these, and then we'll talk about how to avoid them. Criticism is really hard on relationships. It's not that you can't make complaints. Criticism and complaints are different things, and he defines them this way. Complaints are specific statements of needs not being met. So if I say, hey, I really need you to take the trash out like you said you would, that's a complaint. I'm saying you didn't do something. I'm saying that I need you to do it. A criticism is a personal attack. You're not just saying there's a problem, you're saying there's something wrong with you. An accusation of moral failing or some other pervasive personal trait. It's really common to make generalizations like you always or you never and spread it beyond the complaint that you're making to a whole smearing of their character all the time. An example of a complaint would be, hey, I'm upset that you didn't do the dishes and now the pans are still dirty when I need to make dinner. That's a complaint. A criticism would be, you never clean up around here. You always say you will, and then you leave me in the lurch. You have no consideration. You're just like a 2-year-old. You can see this is not going to go over well. It's not going to have the effect you want of making the person feel like jumping up and doing the dishes like they said they will. You're making them feel bad, and they're immediately going to go defensive. The second horseman was contempt. Contempt is poison to relationships. It can include verbal insults that can go along with part of the criticism. It can also include gestures like rolled eyes, sneering, dismissive gestures like waving your hand in somebody's face. Basically, it's the opposite of showing somebody respect. It is showing someone a lack of respect or even of consideration of any kind. Criticism and contempt hurt. They erode away feelings of mutual respect and admiration. They make the target feel scared or sad or angry or all of the above. If one person is regularly the target of criticism or contempt, they're likely to withdraw. They'll offer less help, less positivity on their own side, less emotional engagement. Unfortunately, that tends to lead to even greater negativity from the other partner. If they're both critical and contemptuous to each other, you're going to have a vicious cycle that escalates even faster. So once these things start, they tend to get worse and worse. If you're getting criticism and contempt from your partner, you're probably going to end up throwing criticism and contempt back, or at least really withdrawing and not offering much. The third horseman is defensiveness. And this is usually a response to having been criticized or treated contemptuously a lot. It happens not only in response to criticism in the moment, but an expectation of criticism because you've gotten it in the past. So if one partner has gotten in the habit of criticizing, the other partner will be ready to be defensive, even against comments that aren't intended as attacks. It becomes a habitual reaction. Defensiveness is our way of protecting ourselves against threats to our self-image. We want to think of ourselves as worthy and competent and good. And if somebody keeps telling us we're not, we want to throw up arguments. We want to throw insults back. We want to change the subject to something else, either a place where they were bad or a place where we were good or something else entirely. Unfortunately, focusing on defending ourselves against accusations means we're not listening to what the problem is that our partner has, that they have presented so poorly that we are feeling defensive. So again, it helps perpetuate this vicious cycle. All the horsemen end up reinforcing each other. The fourth horseman is stonewalling. This usually appears last. It's failing to respond to a partner's overtures, complaints, or requests. So if one person says something and the other person just stares at them or stays playing their phone game and doesn't look up or leaves the room, maybe even slams the door on the way, that's stonewalling. It can be accompanied by things like door slamming or yelling that are hostile in themselves, but it doesn't have to be. The stonewalling, simply the silent not responding or changing the subject, that does harm to relationships. And once at least one of the partners has gotten to this point, it's hard to save the relationship, but still possible. So what is happening here is that the partner who's stonewalling is emotionally flooded. They've gotten so much negative and they're hit so hard by it that they can't really process it productively, and they are withdrawing either physically or emotionally and sensorially. Unfortunately, as with the other horsemen, this tends to escalate the other partner further. They may yell, they may get closer, they may get in their face. They may bring up more problems, and this is just going to make the stonewalling partner withdraw and withdraw and withdraw, or possibly explode. So vicious cycles with all of these. They get worse and worse once they start in divorce or breakup. Or if the couple stays together, they are feeling more and more disconnected, lonely, not engaged with one another and their love for one another. And so this is sad. This is a really sad slide that a lot of relationships get into. So how can we avoid that? How can we interrupt that and make our relationships thrive? The the core concept here of turning towards is how we respond to our partner's bids for connection with us. Every time someone makes any kind of an overture to us, any kind of a bid for connection, big or small, we have a choice. We can turn away, we can turn against, or we can turn towards their bid. When we turn against someone, we are providing hostility in return to whatever they've said or done. We are insulting or sneering or dismissing. If we turn away, we're ignoring it or changing the subject or somehow just not engaging with what they said. Stonewalling is an extreme form of turning away. Criticism and contempt are both forms of turning against. They're attacks. Our other option is to turn towards the bid. That's engaging with them and with their communication. And that's what nurtures relationships. We're not talking about big gestures here. We're talking about the everyday interactions that make up our lives. Noticing when your partner is telling you something or asking a question or asking you for something and giving them a friendly answer, whether or not it's a yes, I'll do that, a friendly answer. It's about smiling back and hugging back. It's about listening to what they're interested in and adding to it, making more connections. So that's the essence of turning towards. What can happen in relationships that are not doing well is we start seeing only the negatives in each other and in the relationship. And we forget about the good things and we overlook the good things. We actually start noticing fewer good things, even if they're still there. So again, with these cycles, they reinforce each other. We want to make sure we're in a positive cycle rather than a negative one. When things get overwhelmingly negative in a relationship, that effect actually permeates backwards into our memories, and we can't even remember the good things that were there at first. Gottman's observed this with asking couples about their first memories of each other. And, all of them were in love to begin with, got married, but when their marriages are in trouble, you ask them about their first sight of each other and they can't really remember why they liked each other to begin with. It's actually pretty sad. So we can miss those bids for connection. We can miss someone responding to our own bids once we get into this negative override state where we're just noticing the negatives because they've been so common. It doesn't even take very much negative to put us in negative sentiment override. Unfortunately, humans perceive negative interactions and negative experiences way louder than we experience positive things. It actually takes about 7 positives to balance a negative. In other words, if you have 7 little bad things happen and 1 little good thing happen, other way around. If you have 1 positive thing and 1 negative thing, it'll feel overwhelmingly negative. If you have 7 positive things and 1 negative thing, it'll feel neutral, about even. That's how much positive you need to balance out just 1 little negative interaction with a partner and have the relationship feel neutral. So if you want your relationship to feel good, you need to pour on those positives and notice those positives. In relationships that are going well, the balance is way over 7-1 positive. Gottman's counted. He's done all the little ticky marks on the paper, looking at how often they touch each other, smile at each other, respond to each other's remarks. And it's all these little moment to moment things. We're not talking about, well, I gave you this huge present or did you this huge favor. We're just talking about smiling back and going, oh yeah, I remember that kind of thing. Once you start getting into the negative focus kind of perspective, though, it can be hard to notice that stuff, and it feels awkward to try to bring up positives. Like, ugh, this is so fake, right? It's hard to think of the good stuff when your impulse is to go, but it's mostly negative. How is this going to work? So I wanted to read one specific quote from the 7 Principles of Making Marriage Work. Sometimes couples resist searching for and expressing gratitude for their spouse's positive behavior because they tell me doing so feels phony to them. But developing a positive habit doesn't sugarcoat a relationship. Instead, it resets it to a more realistic perspective. As I said, once people are in negative positive override, they actually overlook positives. So it's not deluding yourself, it's bringing yourself back to notice the stuff that's there, and that will nurture your relationship. Let's see, covered this stuff. So you can shift the ratios by consciously favoring positive interactions, determining to respond to bids with positive responses, turning towards your partner, and noticing things that you appreciate about your partner, thinking about them. Saying it to yourself is helpful. Saying it to your partner is even better. Letting them know, hey, I really appreciated that you picked up the kid this morning, even though it was usually my turn. That made my day so much easier. Or, I just love your singing voice. Or, hey, you look great in that outfit today. Or, you did a great job at your presentation, or whatever. Just little things. Let them know that you notice them, you admire them, you appreciate them. And Gottman uses the word cherish. To cherish your partner is to make an active choice to respect them and admire them in your own thinking and feeling and in how you communicate to them. So we want to cherish our partners. We want to see the positives. This doesn't mean ignoring the negatives. We do still want to address negatives. And if they're really big negatives, maybe you're not going to stick together, but you don't have to let kind of ordinary everyday negatives that every relationship has doom your relationship. You don't have to make it be the only thing that you see. We want to smile at our partners. We want to give them, a pat, a hug. If they like that kind of touch, you want to do what they like. Do little things to make their day easier, not because they did one good thing for you, so you'll do one good thing back, but just because you like them and you want to make their day better. And responding to bids includes engaging with what they say. If they bring something up, you think about it, acknowledge it. Think about how you can engage with that if it reminds you of something else, or yeah, you remember that too, or you've observed this other thing that's related to that. You can disagree. You don't have to always say yes in order to be turning towards. You can disagree, you can refuse a request, you can say no, I can't do that, or no, I think you're wrong about that, and still nurture the connection, as long as you're doing it in a way that considers your partner's feelings and needs rather than dismissing them. So I have an example here that is very recent and personal. Hi, Mickey. So if my partner asks me, hey, will you go for a walk with me and the kids? It's really important to me if you'll come along. Turning away would be going, no, no further communication, simply refusal. That's a kind of turning away. Worse yet, just grunting, or no response at all. Turning against would be something like, I don't have time for that. Can't you see I'm busy? That would be a hostile response, and that would damage our relationship because it would not only be dismissing his need, but also throwing hostility in his direction. A better response would be, sorry, hon, I just can't do it this time. I have so much to do. Better would be, oh, I'd love to, but I'm really anxious about this talk I have coming up that I need to prep for, and I need some time to at least get started on it so I'm not feeling so stressed out. I hope you guys have a great time. So you can see how I've still said no, but I've let him know that his feelings are important to me, and given him a reason why I can't, and given him and the kids good wishes on their trip that they're going on without me. So this is an illustration of how we can still turn towards even when we're saying no, just so you don't have that confusion that you have to always be smiling and positive, and that means you can't say no. It's not true. You can be smiling and positive and saying no, or you can even not be smiling, but still be turning towards your partner. Probably the most important place to be careful to turn towards, or at least not to turn away or against, is when you're first starting a conversation, especially about a difficult topic. It's really easy to start off with criticism or contempt, and that's what Gottman calls a harsh startup. It pretty much dooms the conversation right at the start. If you want something to change and you start the conversation with a harsh startup, your partner doesn't want to help. Your partner wants to hide or bite back. So you want to practice soft startups by thinking about what you actually want to achieve, not what you don't want, but what you do want. And if possible, acknowledging your own role in whatever has been not happening or happening. Hey, I know I didn't remind you about this, but I really need this to happen next time. Keep yourself grounded in respect for your partner and what your goal is when you bring up tough stuff, so that you don't end up just unproductively lashing out and setting your partner off on a negative tack too, and just whirling up into the negative again. You might also notice some overlap here with some of the concepts in Crucial Conversations, which is a book we keep coming back to. That's a really valuable book for tough conversations. So relationships, good or bad, are built out of these small everyday interactions. Every moment is a chance to nurture your relationship. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to turn towards every single second. But if most of the time you respond to your partner's bids lovingly by turning towards them rather than against or away, even if you're tired, even if you're disagreeing, if you do it most of the time, even if relationships have been negative for a while, it can be surprisingly effective at turning things around or making things even better. So whoever you're trying to foster a good relationship with, try to be overwhelmingly loving rather than contemptuous or critical, and engage with your partner's bids. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. What a nice ending. Can we get a round of applause? Can people unmute for a moment?
Awesome talk. Woo.
Nice.